Trapped Games, Crisis Core, Final Fantasy VII, exclusively for the PSP. Never ported to any other platform. This game is stranded on the PSP, where no one can realistically play it ever again legitimately. And that is quite a shame, as it is possibly the only piece of media spun off from Final Fantasy VII that's actually good. As Final Fantasy VII was quite popular, it has been milked over and over again by Square Enix, usually creating nothing of quality. But Crisis Core was a rare exception. It forgoes the turn-based combat of traditional Final Fantasy, and instead goes for a real-time combat system. It also forgoes having a party of heroes, instead just having one character you control, Zack. But not all elements of combat are strictly under your control, as summons, levels up, and other effects are actually doled out by a slot machine in the corner. It's not as random as the game wants you to think it is, as most abilities that it affects appear to be on a pretty straightforward timer, and leveling up is controlled by an invisible EXP system, letting it know when to hit 777s for the level up. But you control when you attack, and what magic you have, and items of course. But strangely, there's only one weapon in the game, that being the sword that Zack has at the start of the game. It never changes, which is odd for an action RPG. The more action-oriented combat would reappear in the Final Fantasy VII Remake years later. One thing that didn't return, and appears to be wholly unique to Crisis Core, is a cast of likable characters that aren't just the human embodiment of angst.
Zack. It's good to finally meet face to face. Lazard, director of Soldier.
Hey,
On to business.
Our protagonist, Zack, was briefly shown in the original Final Fantasy VII. Here is fleshed out as a member of the Shinra Soldier program, trying hard to climb the ranks and become a hero in his own right, while being mostly oblivious to the fact that Shinra and his bosses are not in the heroism business. Also introduced are several more soldier characters, several of which are presented as being as famous and noteworthy as Sephiroth was supposed to be, yet strangely, these characters are never mentioned again anywhere in the Final Fantasy VII canon. We also meet several new characters that fill in bureaucratic positions within Shinra, and we also see some characters from Final Fantasy VII proper, who are often portrayed somewhat differently than they were in the original game.
Ugh. So Turks always do this stuff?
Someone has to do it.
Must be rough.
Don't worry. We're paid much better than you are.
No way!
These characters are all used to tell a pretty decent story, mostly dealing with Zack growing up and realizing that his view of the world might not be accurate. And there are many asides taken that fill in details about the world of Final Fantasy VII. It should also be noted that there is more to do here than just the main story. There is a huge amount of optional content in the form of missions. Accessed from any save point, these are doled out as the story progresses, or sometimes found when talking to NPCs. It is not uncommon for missions to turn into a series of missions that tell their own stories, like a Shinra public security officer challenging you to a series of war games to prove the superiority of his organization over Soldier. or missions about Zack's days off going horribly wrong. Many of these mission stories, while optional, actually flesh out the universe and make it feel a little more real. But even if the stories themselves do not interest you, they all come with their own rewards, and those are, almost universally, worth getting. As these optional missions are how you get the majority of the game's summons, and some rare pieces of materia, and even unlock things for the ever-present slot machine to do. Individual missions are also relatively short, and I believe this was done for the sake of the game being a handheld game. As when playing a handheld system, you don't know if you're gonna have an hour or 5 minutes to play. Being handheld in no way held this game back, however, as the graphics and sound are both beautiful, and the gameplay was solid, and even the voice acting, what there is in the game, is quite solid. It is very strange that this game was never ported elsewhere, as it had strong reviews at the time of release, and sold 3 million units worldwide, which was considered high for a PSP release. As fanfare for Final Fantasy VII seems to live on in perpetuity, it is odd that this never got an enhanced version for the PlayStation 3 or even PlayStation 4. At the time of its original release, many PSP games got a PS2 version released alongside it or shortly thereafter, but Crisis Core did not receive such a release. There was also never a digital release, so this is a PSP game that cannot be played on the PlayStation Vita. Not that a Vita is any easier to find than a PSP at this point. There seems to be no plans for a re-release or remaster on the horizon. There is, however, the small glimmer of hope for this game that the story of Crisis Core is going to be remade to be part of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis for iOS and Android. But personally, I would rather see a port or enhanced remaster, as unlikely as that is. But for now, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII will remain trapped on the PSP. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Earthbound Beginnings. The game Nintendo doesn't want you to play. Earthbound Beginnings is the predecessor of the cult classic Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. It was released as Mother for the Famicom in Japan in 1989, and oddly did receive an English translation around that time before being cancelled due to the upcoming release of the Super Nintendo. Its sequel, for the Super Nintendo, Mother 2, would be released to the US as Earthbound and become a cult classic. Fans of Earthbound would ultimately find a way to play Mother 1, also known online as Earthbound 0, through the horrors of emulation. And that was the only option until 2015, when Mother 1, with its original translation from 1990, was released onto the Wii U eShop, which, to this day, is the only official way to play the original Mother, outside of Japan, as it was never released on the original Wii's eShop, nor on the DS or 3DS eShops, and it was not selected to be one of the games on the NES Mini. And it truly is a mystery as to why Nintendo wants to keep this game hidden. Nintendo, for their part, has maintained the nebulous excuse of licensing issues whenever talking about a release of Earthbound, Earthbound Beginnings, or Mother 3 in the West. I am far from being a legal expert, but I can find no further clarification on what this actually means, or what licenses are actually involved that are the issue. As even if we are never seeing these games ever again, I would at least like to know why, in no uncertain terms. And I'm sure I'm not the only fan of this series that would like that. At the time of this video, the Wii U eShop is still open, but how long it will remain open is unknown. And once closed, this game will again be lost to the gaming public at large. It seems very odd that it hasn't been made available on the Switch in any form, as paying for the Switch online service gives you a healthy library of original NES games. It seems very odd that this classic has not been made available on there. Failing that, they could make it available for individual purchase on the Switch, like they did with the original Fire Emblem, but instead it remains available only on the sadly failed Wii U, and is one of the very few Wii U exclusives to actually remain exclusive. It is possible that Nintendo is simply waiting till the Wii U eShop is discontinued, though I doubt that highly. I am unfortunately quite certain that we will never see another Earthbound Beginnings official release. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Grand Theft Auto, Vice City Stories. Originally released for the PSP in 2006, was also available on the PlayStation 2 in 2007. Unlike its companion game, Liberty City Stories, it has not found its way anywhere else, like onto modern cell phones. Vice City Stories is the earliest part of the Grand Theft Auto 3D universe, taking place in 1984, 2 years before the original Vice City. This game will never let you forget that it is the 80s. With the fashion and culture of the 80s exaggerated to comical proportions, and even the collection mission being 99 red balloons. In this game, you play as Victor Vance, who may or may not have died at the beginning of the original Vice City. He is a more tragic figure than the majority of Grand Theft Auto protagonists, as he is not a career criminal at the beginning of the story. He's a man serving in the United States Army, trying to get money for his brother's medical treatments. Early on, he finds himself betrayed by his commanding officer, and with no other real options, he finds himself descending into the criminal world of Vice City. But despite being forced into this life, Victor Vance is an ambitious man, and soon finds himself taking over the city, which leads to the unique gameplay elements of this game. In addition to the usual Grand Theft Auto gameplay of doing missions, stealing cars, and random acts of violence, there is a empire-building aspect to this game. A criminal empire, to be clear. You buy patches of land and can then build various criminal businesses onto the land in various levels. These criminal businesses will unlock missions unique to them, rewarding you with various bonuses for the business and for your character. But more than that, they will affect other things that are around the business. For example, if you open a protection racket, which doesn't make very much money, it will make attacks on your other businesses in the area less likely. Whereas other businesses, such as prostitution and drugs, make much more money, they are also much more likely to be attacked. At least until you've bought up all the land and have all the businesses, at which point there's no one left to attack you. But you won't be dealing with this empire building alone, as many characters from the original Vice City are along for the ride to help Victor. And for the most part, their stories in this game will inform how they appeared in the original Vice City. This game in many ways served as a prototype for what Grand Theft Auto would slowly change into, with its more tragic protagonist and slightly more serious story elements. or the business and empire building mechanics returning for the online portion of Grand Theft Auto V. This game clearly left an impact on what Grand Theft Auto is today. So why can't you play it today? It all comes down to the inclusion of one real-life celebrity who is in the game playing himself. Mr. Phil Collins. In order to port, remaster, or re-release this game in any way, Rockstar would need to negotiate a deal with Phil Collins for likeness rights. So if you needed more reason to hate Phil Collins, besides Susudio, here you go. And his inclusion was not just a cameo in one mission. Towards the end of the game, he shows up several times, meaning his removal from the game would cause problems. So, unless Rockstar wants to pay a lot of money, this game is never, ever coming out again. It stays trapped on the PlayStation Portable and PlayStation 2. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends.
We're gonna need to get my car fixed up, Vic. Old girl ain't looking so good.
Trapped Games, the Gaia Trilogy, also known as the Soul Blazer Trilogy, are 3 games developed by Quintet, released for the Super Nintendo, and never released anywhere else. These games being Soul Blazer in 1992, Illusion of Gaia in 1993, and Terranigma in 1995. They are an unofficial trilogy, united by their developer, and also the themes present throughout. All of them are action RPGs that deal heavily with themes of destruction and recreation. And small things unite them, such as reoccurring characters like Turbo the dog. So when playing these games, it's sort of like reading stories that are all written by the same author, while different stories that are technically not connected, you notice little isms throughout. In Soul Blazer, you play as a being created by God to restore the world. Evil has apparently locked everything away, and you release people, buildings, plants, and animals by slaying groups of monsters in dungeons, and people's heads, and objects sometimes. Illusion of Gaia is about a boy named Will and his friends trying to stop an approaching calamity. Will is given this task by Gaia. To do this, he can move things with his mind and change form. You go about to various places from the real world, but their time and place is all wrong, as if the world has been shuffled. Terranigma only came out in Japan and Europe, and is about a troublemaker that opens Pandora's box. But this sets in motion events that will restore the world to the way it should be, as the boy had been living in a comfortable lie. While none of these games were great sellers back in the day, they all were cult hits. As in the Super Nintendo days, role-play games were a very niche market, at least here in the West. But even after Final Fantasy VII and the rise of the JRPG in the West, these games never got a re-release in any form. No PlayStation Edition, no Virtual Console release, no PlayStation 2 compilation. Recently, another Quintet-developed game, ActRaiser, received a remake, and while I haven't had the chance to play it yet, it did get me thinking about other Quintet games, like the Gaia Trilogy. I wouldn't even want a full-blown remake. I'd be happy if they were the exact same games from the 90s, maybe with just a slight polish on their translations. because as it stands now, it's very difficult for a modern gamer to experience these games, at least officially. And this is a real shame, and it applies to basically every game that was developed by Quintet. But for now, these games remain trapped, way back on the Super Nintendo. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games Mega Man Maverick Hunter X. Originally released in December of 2005 for the PSP. It is a remake of the original Mega Man X with 3D graphics. Now, obviously, there are a ton of ways to still play Mega Man X, but this version is different in a number of ways. Other than the improved graphics, the levels are also different in a number of ways. All the levels have been redesigned, at least to some degree. The various upgrades for X have also been moved around. No longer can you find his dash upgrade with Chill Penguin. Instead, it is slightly hidden in the Flame Mammoth stage. This applies to his other 3 upgrades as well, and to heart containers and sub-tanks, meaning that this remake has something to offer, even those that know the Super Nintendo version front to back. But there is also more. After completing the games, you unlock 2 bonus features. The first, and honestly more impressive bonus, is the ability to play through the game as Vile. You get a brand new story, and a completely different way to play the game, as Vile doesn't have access to every boss ability at all times. Vile instead has 3 weapons he can use: his arm cannon, his shoulder cannon, and his knee cannon, I guess you'd call it. Beating bosses will give you different versions of these weapons, but you can only take one of each with you on any level. And they can be used infinitely. Do you take weak, rapid-firing weapons, or very slow weapons that do a ton of damage? This is something you need to decide for every level, as not all weapons are perfect for all situations. The other bonus is a 25-minute anime movie called The Day of Sigma. It explained backstories of Mega Man X, Zero, and how Sigma went Maverick. I am not showing clips here, as there are potential copyright issues with showing them. But I will say that it is well animated, interesting, and very entertaining. Also, this movie is available in both Mega Man X Legacy collections, although this version of the game is not. This all makes for a very satisfying package that is sadly no longer available. It was available for the PS Vita digitally, but it has been delisted. And it is a shame this version is not available, as it included everything that made the original version great, as well as having interesting remixed content, along with brand new content. But right now, like a lot of other Mega Man games, this is a trapped game on the PSP. Maybe one day we'll get a Legacy collection for the other games. This, Command Mission, Mega Man Legends, Mega Man Soccer, etc. But I doubt it. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends.
Mission accomplished.
Trapped Games Final Fantasy IV Complete Collection for the PSP. Now, before we go further, yes, Final Fantasy IV can be played a huge number of places, with 2 distinct versions being available on Steam currently. But the version we are talking about today remains trapped on the PlayStation Portable. What sets this version apart from other versions of Final Fantasy IV are first the graphics, which are based on the original 16-bit sprite work, but enhanced and made far more beautiful, making some of the best looking 2D artwork the Final Fantasy series has ever seen. Secondly, this is not just Final Fantasy IV. This also includes Final Fantasy IV The After Years, and the exclusive Final Fantasy IV Interlude. The After Years originally being a episodic mobile game based on Final Fantasy IV, taking place several years after the conclusion of Final Fantasy IV. It took the form of various chapters that all centered around one or a very small group of characters. This later came to the West in the form of WiiWare, and later came to Steam, although remade into some terrible-looking 3D graphics. This version on the PSP here is the only physical release the After Years ever received. Unique to this version is Final Fantasy IV Interlude. This is relatively short, being about the length of, say, 2 of the chapters from the After Years, and serves to connect the original Final Fantasy IV to the After Years. It answers a few questions and clarifies a few plot details. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it is a lot of fun and worthwhile for any fan of Final Fantasy IV. Sadly, for all this version had going for it, it never found its way to any other platform. And it is truly a shame, as around the same time, a version of Final Fantasy IV came out on the DS. And instead of being beautiful 2D sprite work, it was made into the 3D that looked pretty good for a handheld at the time the DS was capable of. And this version ended up getting ported everywhere. Onto Steam, and onto both Android and Apple phones. I assume marketing thought that bad-looking 3D was more marketable than beautifully done 2D. And worse, this version of the game made a ton of little tweaks to the game that really ruined the experience. Still, I wasn't without hope. At least not till recently. As a new version of Final Fantasy IV has come out, the Pixel Remaster, making any return to the version made for the PSP entirely unlikely. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games Mega Man Powered Up. Originally released in March of '06 for the PlayStation Portable, where it has remained trapped to this very day. Mega Man Powered Up was an enhanced remake of the original Mega Man. It had shiny new 3D visuals, but the gameplay was in 2.5D, meaning that it looked nicer, but still played like classic Mega Man. However, graphics were not the only thing enhanced. There was an effort made to put the story at the forefront. As before every boss fight, you do get Mega Man trying to talk the various other robots out of what they're doing. He universally fails at doing so, as after all you still need to have the boss fight. But these conversations also fill in little details about the world and what's going on. There are also several gameplay additions. Most noticeably, there are now 8 Robot Masters, whereas the original only had 6. the new ones being Oil Man and Time Man. You can also change up your gameplay, because after you beat any given Robot Master, you can now play through the game as that Robot Master. There is also a series of challenges for each of the Robot Masters to do. This makes for a lot of added content, as every Robot Master plays distinctly, making for a completely new experience with each one. There are, of course, other things to unlock. You can unlock Mega Man's Charge Buster and Slide after beating the game. Doing challenges allows you to play as Proto Man, and a whole load of various cosmetic things that we don't need to get into. This all made for a remake of Mega Man that was objectively better than the original, which can also be played here if you're so inclined, but be warned if you've never played it, Mega Man 1 is very rough around the edges. And it is also far and away the hardest of the classic Mega Man games. So why has this game remained trapped on the PSP? Very simple answer here: sales figures. Capcom, and I'm quoting here, considers the sales for this game in Japan to be very poor. The sales were stronger in the United States, however, that still wasn't enough. Which is a tragedy, as this was meant to be the first in a series of Mega Man remakes. But of course, with poor sales figures, those sequels never got made. And now this is a remake quietly forgotten about by Capcom, not appearing in any of the modern Legacy collections, not available on your cell phone, not even getting a digital-only release on Switch, where it would fit perfectly. And that is the sad story of Mega Man Powered Up. PSP exclusive. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends.
I win! Naturally.
Trapped Games, Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Originally released in the summer of 1993 for the original Game Boy. Later being remastered for the Game Boy Color in 1998, which is the version of the game that is being used here. And yes, while Nintendo has made an enhanced remake for the Switch of Link's Awakening, this original version, and later DX version, are not available currently. The Game Boy Color DX version was available on the 3DS eShop, but as the 3DS eShop is no more, it is currently unavailable. And that is a true shame, as despite being released on the humble Game Boy, it was a full-fledged Zelda experience, easily on par with the Super Nintendo's Link to the Past. Which is apparently what this game started life as, a demake of Link to the Past for the Game Boy. But rather than a demake, it went off in its own creative direction, making it one of the most unique Zelda titles ever released. As despite having the moniker of Legend of Zelda, there is actually no Princess Zelda anywhere in this game. There is also no Triforce, no Ganon, no Hyrule, and no sages to speak of. Instead, we are on an island that apparently has no contact with the outside world, despite somehow all speaking the same language as Link, and items in the dungeons being highly reminiscent of items you find in Hyrule. On this island, on its highest peak, is a giant egg containing the seeming god of this island, known as the Windfish. Link discovers that to get off of this island, he needs to collect 8 instruments from 8 dungeons, to play a song, to hatch that egg, and wake the Windfish. And as he goes on this adventure, he will discover that doing so will almost certainly erase this island from existence. Along with everything on the island, which does lead to some ethical questions about what Link is ultimately doing on this island. But being a Game Boy game, these weren't addressed. But what you do have here is a surprisingly large world, with a lot of charming details, and a ton of little secrets to find here and there. This was the first Zelda game to have a trading sequence in it, the first top-down Zelda to have a jumping mechanic, and before each of the dungeons there is some other puzzle or mini-adventure to have before you can access the dungeon. Meaning you never get to go on autopilot, just going from dungeon to dungeon. You will often need to thoroughly explore areas to potentially find items to unlock the way forward. Before the very first dungeon, you need to explore the woods to find a mushroom to make magic powder that you use on a talking raccoon so you can get the key to go into the first dungeon. And that very much sets the tone for the rest of the game. There are also optional mini-games to play, and a hunt for seashells you can do if you want a better sword. This really did push the limits of what the Game Boy was capable of. But why is it unavailable today? Well, by the time this video goes up, it will be impossible to add funds to the 3DS eShop, where you could formerly buy this title for $6. And despite the 3DS eShop going away with a lot of Game Boy titles, there has yet to be a way to play old Game Boy and Game Boy Color titles on the Switch. There are rumors of Game Boy and Game Boy Color and even Game Boy Advance being added to Nintendo Switch Online, but that is only rumors. There has been no confirmation that will happen, and I doubt that it will ever happen. For whatever reason, Nintendo seems almost ashamed of its handheld output, and that is something I find tragic and confusing. This might very well be the best game that was ever released on the Game Boy, and while I enjoy that enhanced Switch version, I do think the original, or at least Game Boy Color version, should be available to play. Ideally, they would have been unlockable bonuses in the new Switch version, except that didn't happen. These are quality games that I just wish were available for people to play currently. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Sim City. Now, of course, there were many, many ways to play the original Sim City. It was ported around to just about every system on the market at the time. Mac, PC, various microcomputers, and all of those versions had roughly the same experience. And you can still play the DOS version through your browser today, for free. But the version I'm talking about today is the Super Nintendo version of SimCity, which was a launch title for the console. This version was different from other versions. It was enhanced in certain ways. The main difference being that there are various milestones you reach that give you access to new buildings. This starts almost immediately when you're given the mayor's house. Presumably the place where you live in-game, it will greatly enhance the property values of any residential zones placed around it. And there are many structures like this. Sometimes you're even given a choice. Do you prefer to open a casino or an amusement park? Both will generate money for your city, but the casino will lead to higher crime rates, and the amusement park will make traffic a much worse problem. So, which problem do you want to deal with to get a little increased income every year? Build enough fire or police stations, and you get a police or fireman's headquarters. much more effective than the lesser stations at dealing with their problem. You also got a seasonal cycle, a feature that would become standard in later SimCity games. But despite its enhancements, there was one issue some people had with this version. As it was a launch title, it predated the Super Nintendo mouse. Thus, despite being a city builder, there is no mouse support. Some people take great issue with that fact. I personally don't see it as much of a problem. It is quite odd that this is not available from Nintendo at the moment. They had a big hand in making this version, and the Switch does have an online service that gives you access to a healthy library of Super Nintendo games. However, SimCity is not among them. The issue being with who holds the actual license for SimCity at the moment. And until that can be sorted out and the right palm can be greased, there will be no Super Nintendo SimCity to be had. Which is a shame, as it is easily the best version of the original SimCity. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. It's the holidays again, and I feel like I should do something holiday-related. But I'm not big on any particular holiday traditions, so I just want to do something that at best could be described as holiday-adjacent. Which leads us to the Duke Nukem 3D expansion, Nuclear Winter, which was originally released just after Christmas in 1997. This used to be available on Steam in the Duke Nukem 3D Megaton Edition, but that has been delisted, so this is not really available online anywhere, at least not legally. So if you want to play it, I guess go on eBay and try to find yourself a physical disc. This expansion is pretty much just Christmas time in Duke 3D. What you get here is 7 levels, 5 of which are wholly new. The first 2 levels are actually based on early levels of Duke Nukem 3D, only you kind of play them in reverse. You also get some new enemies for Duke to kill, some of which are just new sprites on old enemies, and some of which are actually new. Some of these new enemies, specifically the various kind of elves, don't really look right. They don't gel with the Duke 3D art style at all. Which makes me think they may have originally been intended for use in an original game, and then when that didn't pan out, they made a Duke expansion instead. But anyway, these new elf enemies, and presumably the snowmen too, are here because Santa Claus has been kidnapped by an elven militia, and apparently Duke Nukem is the kind of guy that's gonna go save Santa. But when you do finally get to Santa, he's been brainwashed, so you have to fight and kill Santa. Which is kind of a bummer, and also why I sort of just consider this holiday adjacent. So this is not the best of the Duke Nukem 3D expansions, but when an expansion starts by recycling old levels, you know you're not in for the best experience. And this does a lot of annoying things to try and show how holiday-oriented it is, like putting Santa hats on the strippers and enemies, and replacing the pretty good Duke 3D music with terrible versions of holiday songs. Still, even though this is probably the least of the Duke 3D expansions, I still get a kick out of playing this around December. I mean, it's certainly preferable to spending time with family members or trying to shop during the month of December. So, if you can hunt down a copy of Nuclear Winter, maybe give it a shot, but I would not recommend paying very much for it. If you can get your hands on this for less than $10, give it a try. If it costs any more than $10, walk away. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games NES Remix. or perhaps you call it NES Remix. This was originally released digitally for the Wii U back in 2013, with a second volume coming out in 2014, which was followed by a physical release containing both volumes for the Wii U, and a somewhat cut-down version released for the 3DS. And what we have here is basically a Nintendo best-of collection, of sorts anyway. You have tiny snippets of old 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System games. You have either one goal or a small series of goals to accomplish. You are given a number of stars based on how well you perform at doing these things, which enough stars will unlock remix levels, and even new games to do these little snippets of gameplay in. The remixes can be quite interesting, as you might play through parts of games with different characters, or different mechanics than you're used to. And these remixes, and even these snippets of gameplay, are a great way to make these now ancient games still seem quite interesting, even to a younger, modern audience. As while some of these games have aged quite well, some of them not so much. They really aren't that fun to a modern audience anymore. And these short, snappy versions of the games are actually a great way to introduce a new audience to these games. But sadly, the NES remixes are only available on the Wii U and 3DS, both of which are pretty much gone at this point. And I would love to see these come to the Switch. And I don't just want these to come to the Switch, I want to have more of this come to the Switch. Because this is such a wonderful concept, and it could be applied to Game Boy games, or Super Nintendo games, even Virtual Boy games, or just to more 8-bit Nintendo games. Or apply this same idea to the old Nintendo arcade versions of these same games. These remixes are fun and a wonderful concept, and there's no reason for them to die on no longer supported hardware. So while these games may be trapped now, let's hope they don't stay trapped. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games Metroid Prime Trilogy. Originally released for the Wii in August of 2009, this is a collection of Metroid Prime 1, 2, and 3. Metroid Prime 1 and 2 were given slight graphical improvements, as well as motion controls, as they both started life as GameCube games. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, however, was the same game that was released in 2007. This was an excellent package for the Wii, as Metroid Prime 1 and 2 are considered two of the best games for the GameCube, and are in a small minority of games that were actually improved with the implementation of motion controls. Metroid Prime was Nintendo's first real attempt at doing a first-person shooter, and it also did an excellent job of translating the Metroidvania style of gameplay into a first-person view. Metroid Prime 2 was largely more of the same, but it added a light and dark world mechanic, last seen in Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. It also greatly expanded the world of Metroid. For the first time ever, we got to see people other than Samus in the Metroid world. We actually see what a military operation in this universe looks like, and what their equipment might be like. Oddly, most of their weapons seem less effective than what Samus is carrying. And of course, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption is included in this package. Like Metroid Prime 2, it does a lot to expand the universe of Metroid, but it was also a fairly early Wii game, so it goes really nutty with the motion controls. The whole intro section is bogged down in you doing little gimmicks and gestures with the Wiimote, and while I understand how novel and interesting this would have been back in 2007, it's a real drag now. Thankfully, as the game goes on, these gimmicks are less used, and we ultimately get a worthy conclusion to the Metroid Prime trilogy. Now obviously this was a collection released for the Wii. and finding a physical copy for the Wii is quite difficult now, and expensive. The Metroid Prime trilogy was released digitally for the Wii U. It was not enhanced in any way, it was literally just a digital version of the Wii disc. And the Wii U shop is closed anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. So it is very much time for these games to become available on the Nintendo Switch. Obviously, the motion controls would need to be stripped out, but Metroid Prime 1 and 2 were originally made with controllers in mind, so that should be no challenge. Metroid Prime 3, on the other hand, was made solely with motion controls in mind, and converting that to a standard controller would be somewhat difficult, but not impossible, as games like Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, that were originally made with motion controls, have made the conversion to standard controls. So something similar could certainly be done here. Weirdly, release of the Metroid Prime trilogy on Switch has been hinted at repeatedly, with the last batch of rumors claiming it would be released in November of 2022. But November came and went, and there still is no Metroid Prime trilogy on Switch. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Resident Evil 4. Yes, this is one of the most ported games ever. And undoubtedly, whatever hardware you own, you can find a version of Resident Evil 4 available to you. But there is one version that is trapped. And that is the Wii version of Resident Evil 4. It may not be the best-looking version, but it is far from the worst-looking version. After all, there are the PS2 versions, and cell phone versions to take the worst-looking crown. But what the Wii version had was the best controls ever for Resident Evil 4. As RE4 is in that very small minority of games actually enhanced when given motion controls. And sadly, those were only available on the Wii version. They weren't made available with the PlayStation Move, or the Switch version in any capacity. The only way you can enjoy this game with motion controls is on a Wii, or on a Wii U in Wii mode. In fact, before the Wii U eShop closed down, Resident Evil 4 was available digitally. Sadly, it didn't receive any graphical improvements. It was literally just the Wii version, but digital. Sadly, this version of RE4 is not likely to ever be ported anywhere, as motion controls have widely fallen out of favor, and Capcom has a complete remake of RE4 in the works. So this version is going to remain trapped and ultimately forgotten, and that is a terrible, sad fate for easily the best version of Resident Evil 4. Please do like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. This was going to be a Trapped Games on Super Mario Advanced 4 for the Wii U. But then it came to the Switch Online service, so it's not really trapped anymore. It's just behind what I consider to be too high of a paywall. So I guess you might call this not Trapped Games for Super Mario Advanced 4 Super Mario Bros. 3, which may be the worst title of any Mario game ever. But despite its rather silly title, this is the definitive way to play Super Mario Bros. 3. And playing the Virtual Console version on Wii U, or the version on Switch Online, is actually superior to any cartridge for a Game Boy Advance that you could get. And that is simply because these Wii U and Switch versions have all of the e-reader levels, which is something that is actually impossible on the Game Boy Advance cartridge version of this. Because the cards that would have unlocked these levels with an e-reader never actually released, at least not all of them. Some of these levels did get released, but as the e-reader was a massive flop here in the US, they stopped producing the cards and canceled mini cards that were coming. So for years these levels existed, but were trapped away in cartridges, with no official way to unlock them. So when Super Mario Advance 4 released on the Wii U Virtual Console, with all of these levels fully intact, it was a sweetheart of a deal at only $7.99. Sadly, with the closure of the Wii U eShop, this deal is no longer available. However, there is still a way to play this game with all of its levels unlocked, and that's if you pay for the more expensive version of the Switch Online service, which will run you $50 a year. This gives you access to the lower tier services, and also Nintendo 64, Genesis, and Game Boy Advanced games. And I am glad that this game is preserved on there in all of its glory, but I personally cannot rationalize $50 a year in order to play it and a few other games. I would be happy to pay another $8 to get a version of this on Switch, but Nintendo doesn't seem to be interested in doing any more virtual consoles. But if you're desperate to play more of Super Mario Bros. 3, you do have an option that exists. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Mega Man 5, Game Boy. Originally released in 1994 for the Game Boy, it was also available on the 3DS eShop when that was still open. But sadly, with the closure of that eShop, there is no official way to play this version of Mega Man 5. But calling this a version of Mega Man 5 is not entirely accurate, as this is not a port or remake of Mega Man 5 for the NES. Unlike the other 4 Mega Man titles for the Game Boy, this is a wholly original game, not having bosses recycled from the NES incarnations of Mega Man. Instead, it has all new robot masters to serve as bosses, and they come from space this time. To go along with the space theme, each of the new bosses is named after one of the planets in our solar system. Not only that, but because they're from space, Mega Man's standard Mega Buster is completely useless against them. Instead, Mega Man is going to have to take down these bosses by fisting them into submission. Because when you charge up the Mega Buster this time, instead of firing a big shot, your fist launches off your hand to hit them. Because apparently, these robots are immune to energy weapons, but the power of a fist hitting them is just too much for them to handle. So in this game, he's not really Mega Man. He's in fact...
Call him Fister Roboto.
But it doesn't just fist.
But once you fire your fist, you do have to wait for it to return before you can charge up another shot for another, fisting. And this can take a little time to actually get used to. Although despite all the grandiose notions of robots coming from space, it does turn out in the end that Dr. Wily was behind this whole series of events, which I'm sure when that was revealed came as a surprise to no one back in 1994. This game did try a few new things with the Mega Man formula. For example, they added a robot cat that attacks things like a buzzsaw. Its name is Tango, and I found it to be completely useless. You could also collect P-chips to exchange for items from Dr. Light. This was the second game in the Mega Man franchise to ever have this kind of thing, the first being Mega Man 4 on the Game Boy. And from Dr. Light, you can buy energy tanks, 1-ups, and more importantly, upgrades for your fist, including an item that allows your fist to grab items on its way back to you, which might be the most useful upgrade ever in a Mega Man game. This was also the last Mega Man game released for the Game Boy. While this was released before the Game Boy Color, it wasn't entirely without color. It was a game that was enhanced when played on the Super Game Boy, a cartridge that allowed you to play Game Boy games on a TV through your Super Nintendo. Those features have, of course, been on display during this video. the nice looking border around the gameplay, and the color palette that shifts depending on where you're at in the game. Sadly, these features were unavailable on the 3DS eShop version of the game. While this game may be trapped at the moment, there is some hope, as after all, Game Boy games have been added to the Switch Online service. And Capcom has been making quite a few Mega Man Legacy collections as of late. And a Legacy collection featuring the 5 Game Boy titles is certainly not outside the realm of possibility. But for now, Mega Man 5 on the Game Boy is sadly a trapped game. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Trapped games. Mega Man 1 through 4 for the Game Boy. I talked about Mega Man 5 for the Game Boy already. I felt it deserved its own video because it was a wholly original game. But 1 through 4 on the Game Boy are highly derivative of the NES Mega Man games. Each one of these takes 4 Robot Masters from one game, and 4 Robot Masters from the next game in the series. Each of them also breaks them down into 2 groups, so you cannot choose from the full 8 in any of these games at any given time. You are given 2 groups of 4 in succession. It's also worth noting that none of the levels in the Game Boy games are one-to-one conversions of the levels from the NES series. Some of them are wildly different, while others are very similar, though all of them will have elements from the original NES levels. Many of the elements you'll notice will be shrunk down, at least somewhat, as the screen on an original Game Boy was fairly small. It's also interesting playing through at least tributes to levels and fighting bosses with abilities you would not have had in the original NES games, such as having the slide available to you in Mega Man 2, or when you're fighting bosses from Mega Man 3 and you have the ability to charge your Mega Buster. This can lead to encounters feeling very different from their original incarnations. Also, since each game has a different mix of bosses, the rock, paper, scissors game you play with boss powers is going to be different from what you remember in the NES games. And sometimes it can be downright counterintuitive. Although not everything in these games is derivative, you will encounter original bosses, specifically when doing the Wily stages in these games. And it's worth noting that Mega Man 4 on the Game Boy was the first Mega Man game to feature a shop mechanic, which honestly is something Mega Man games should have gotten before that point. But these games have a lot to offer. If you've played through the NES Mega Man games 1,000 times, give these a shot, because they're a remix of what you remember. And these certainly don't deserve to be forgotten, because the last place you could buy these was on the 3DS eShop, but it's closed. And while Switch Online has started adding original Game Boy titles, thus far, none of the Mega Man titles have shown up on there. And once upon a time, there was a collection of these games scheduled for release on the Game Boy Advance. Sadly, that was cancelled, and the idea has never really come up again. And while looking into why that game was cancelled, there were a bunch of people talking about the source code being lost for the games. But then when I tried to look into that, I couldn't actually find any official statement about that. So that seems to be just internet myth. So I'm just suggesting that maybe it's time for these games to get a legacy collection of their own, like how most other Mega Man games have gotten them at this point. And it doesn't necessarily need to stop with just the Game Boy games. Both the Game Gear and the Wonder Swan had Mega Man games on them, and both are long overdue for some attention. So how about it, Capcom? I bet you have at least one more Mega Man Legacy collection in ya. Or are you done milking this super fighting robot? Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Kingsfield, the Ancient City. First released all the way back in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. And for those that don't know, The Kingsfield games are the spiritual predecessors of the Souls games, both of the demon and dark variety. However, in terms of gameplay, they don't resemble the Souls games all that much. Rather, they are like the Souls games in the way that world building and storytelling is done, with very few things directly told to you. For example, here in Kingsfield 4, we are told that you need to deliver an idol back to where it belongs. Apparently, the moving of this item from where it belongs has caused the world to start sliding into ruin. And as you explore the world, it becomes clear that it used to be a better place not all that long ago. Almost as if a golden age has suddenly and catastrophically come to an end. You meet very few other characters, most of them looking downtrodden and outright sickly. Throughout the game, these other characters will at times ask you to do things. Sometimes that will lead to rewards. Other times they die while you're doing the exact thing they wanted. And it's not a timing issue, it's just how things unfold. You'll find many different areas in this game that all look as if they have a story to tell. But, as I stated, there's very little direct information. You will have to infer what's going on in these areas for the most part, with just a few words from the sparse NPCs, maybe a little information and an item description. It all makes for a world and setting that is somewhat mysterious, quite dangerous, and thoroughly melancholy throughout. As mentioned previously, the gameplay is absolutely nothing like a Souls game. As the game starts, you have effectively nothing, just the idol you're meant to return. This is a first-person RPG, and right at the beginning there are death pits you can fall into. I think this is meant as a warning to teach you to tread carefully. And right here at the beginning you need to be especially careful. As I said, you start with nothing. No weapon, no armor, you just have the idol. And you can't do anything with that till the very end of the game. But with just a little exploring, you'll find yourself a weapon and some very rudimentary armor. And finding things is going to be the primary way you get most items in this game. As while there are a few shops across the world, their prices for anything you'd actually find useful are usually extreme. Outside of maybe buying a few healing items and a magic crystal or two, there's not much you should realistically buy from shopkeepers. As most of the items that the shopkeepers are selling, you will be able to find out in the world. In fact, you may at times be wondering why the game is giving you so many weapons and armor alternatives. But there is a reason for it. Armor and weapons do degrade with use. But the rate at which items degrade is actually fairly slow. But as they degrade, even though it is slow, their stats do slowly start decreasing. So if you're looking to keep your best possible defense and offense, you will be switching items frequently. However, there is a reason you may wish to keep using a weapon even if you found a better replacement. You can actually level up the weapons in this game. After finishing off enough monsters with a given weapon, it will level up and become more effective. And I guess this is meant to mean that your character is becoming more effective at using the weapon. And this leveling up can happen twice on any given weapon. But it does take a while, and by the time you see that second level up, the weapon will be pretty close to broken. Fairly late into the game, you do encounter a character that can repair your armor and weapons. So if there's a weapon you're fond of and have put a lot of time into, it's worthwhile to keep it in your inventory. There is no weight limit for your inventory in this game. Combat in this game is a fairly slow affair. Enemies will chase you to a certain point, but they all have an invisible boundary they won't cross. So you can simply make enemies chase you to this point, where they will turn around, and then you can hit them in the back with no danger. If you're not interested in doing the cheesy thing, you can strafe around enemies till you see a spot to take a swing. This will of course be more dangerous and will lead to many deaths. Combat is really not the reason you play the Kingsfield series. Also, as you go through this game, you'll repeatedly find yourself in a situation where you know where you need to go. But there is some reason that you cannot go in that direction right now. And this starts right at the beginning. There's a door that you need to go through, but spider webs are preventing you from accessing it. And you can't physically attack these spider webs for some reason. So you have to get your hands on some fire so you can burn the webs down. And the game does this repeatedly in different ways. You need to find a key that's gone missing. You need to shut down a contraption that will kill you if you get too close to the door you need to go through. You need to restore heat to a workshop to melt ice, because apparently your fire magic is good enough to burn spiderwebs, but not quite up to the task of melting ice. As you continue through the game, you'll notice each area has a distinct look, and each area will also have distinct enemies. Early on, it's mostly animals and the occasional zombie. Then you start encountering humans that have apparently been possessed by something. Then you start encountering more strange things, like these totally not xenomorphs right here. Or these early versions of the snake men you'd encounter in Dark Souls and Elden Ring. There are a lot of interesting things to see in this world. It does a far better job of communicating the desolate feeling it's going for than the earlier Kingsfield titles. And part of that is due to graphics, as the first three were of course on PlayStation 1. But sadly, none of the Kingsfield titles are available on modern hardware currently. But we are not without hope, as PlayStation 1 and 2 titles have started to be released digitally on PlayStation 4 and 5. And while thus far none of the Kingsfield games have made this transition, another From Software title for the PlayStation 2 with very similar gameplay to the Kingsfield series, Eternal Ring, did get released. And while that game may not be part of the official Kingsfield series, it does say to me that there is at least a slight chance we might see Kingsfield the Ancient City, or any of the Kingsfield titles, show up one day on the PSN store. Of course, in an ideal world, I'd love to see a collection with remastered versions of all of the Kingsfield titles. Not just the PlayStation 1 and 2 games, there were 2 on PSP in Japan I'd love to see translated and brought over. But I know such happening is fairly unlikely at this point. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, of course, this game is available to play on both PlayStation and Xbox, though sadly not the Switch or PC. But there is a somewhat unique version that is not available to play anywhere today. No, I'm not talking about the Tiger Gamecom version. That version is better off staying trapped. I'm talking about the Sega Saturn version of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was only released in Japan, and that particular version has never had a re-release. Now, most of the Saturn version is the same as the PlayStation version. The hitboxes are a little different. The new control scheme takes a little getting used to, such as to get to the map you have to first open the menu, then get to the map. And of course, a few things do look just slightly different because the Sega Saturn was a very different animal compared to the Sony PlayStation. But that is all fairly minor in the grand scheme of things. The important difference is that in this version there are 4 new areas. 2 in the regular castle, and 2 in the inverted castle. These areas have distinct music, and new enemies with unique sprite work. And these sprites, as far as I can find, have not been used in any other Castlevania game. So the only place to find them are in this Japanese exclusive Sega Saturn port. Another key difference is that you can play Maria in this version, and while other versions have also added Maria in various ways, she plays very uniquely here. Unfortunately, I was not able to get footage of that. I was doing this on a borrowed, highly modified Sega Saturn. But these unique features from the Sega Saturn version are all but forgotten by Konami. The Xbox, PSP, PlayStation 4, and even cell phone versions are all based off the PlayStation 1 original. And it seems to me, Konami could at least make the extra content available to the various releases of Symphony of the Night in the form of DLC. While hardly an ideal solution, it would at least make this content available to fans of the game that are looking to add something new to their experience. But sadly, for the time being, the content of the Sega Saturn version will stay trapped on the Saturn in Japan. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Super Mario 64, DS. Now, admittedly, there are ways to play the original Nintendo 64 version of Mario 64. There have been ever since the Wii. In fact, you can still play it on the Switch, if you're inclined to pay a monthly fee for the privilege. But the version released for the Nintendo DS as a launch title is unavailable these days. It was available as a Virtual Console title on the Wii U, but with the closure of the eShop, that's no longer an option. However, you are seeing the Wii U Virtual Console version of this game in this video. And this version of Mario 64 is unique in a number of aspects. Firstly, you can play as characters other than Mario, his brother Luigi, and his rival Wario. In fact, you actually start the game as Yoshi and have to unlock the ability to play as Mario. And the difference in these characters is not just cosmetic. Each character plays differently and has access to different power-ups, with Wario taking over the ability to become metal, and Luigi getting the invisibility power, while Mario maintains his ability to fly with the wing cap and can also turn into a balloon for some reason. Yoshi can eat enemies, throw eggs, and can get a fire-breathing power-up. And that's in addition to each character having his own speed, jump height, slipperiness, etc. And as some of these differences are key to getting certain stars in levels, this game adds power-ups that allows one character to become another temporarily, in the form of their trademark hats. A red hat will turn whatever character into Mario, a green one into Luigi, and a yellow one into Wario. Though there is no temporary Yoshi item, strangely. In addition to the new characters and their division of power-ups, new levels have been added and new stars have been added to existing levels. For example, you get to fight the King Bomb more than once now. The first time is Yoshi, where you have to throw eggs or spit things at him. And then the second time, it's a fight pulled right from the original game. They have also added entirely new mechanics for getting stars, like having to collect 5 silver stars in order to get a gold one, with the added quirk that every time you get hit, you will lose one of your silver stars and have to recollect it. Of course, this being a game on the Nintendo DS, they had to do something with the second screen. See the little screen in the corner? That is what displayed on the bottom screen. It's just a mini-map like a lot of early DS games did. While this can be useful at times, it hardly feels like a necessary addition. And if this game were ever to be ported, it could easily put the map in the pause menu, or possibly as a mini-map on the screen somewhere. Now, of course, nearly all of the great content from the original version of Mario 64 is here, with the most notable exception being the DS's complete lack of an analog stick, meaning in order to run you will have to hold a button like in a 2D Mario game. And while I am playing this on a Wii U, which does have analog sticks, they do not work as such. They are exactly like using a D-pad. And it is for that reason alone that I've always hoped for a remake of this version of Mario 64. I had hoped with the announcement of Super Mario 3D All-Stars that the content from the DS version might be made available in some way in that collection. Even if it wasn't exactly as it was in this particular version, they still could have included Luigi and Wario as almost extra difficulty settings, as Mario would be the standard difficulty, Luigi would be easy difficulty due to his improved jumping, which does make him my go-to character to play in the DS version, and Wario with his heavier feel and shorter jumps being a kind of hard mode for the game. But we all know that did not happen, not even as a kind of DLC, which is a great shame, as much of the extra content is quite interesting, even if the port itself is flawed in a number of ways. But lately Nintendo has been doing some surprising ports, so I think it is not beyond the realm of possibility that we might get a Super Mario DS port at some time. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends. Trapped Games, Dragon Quest VIII. Originally released in 2004 for the PlayStation 2. Dragon Quest VIII was a JRPG, and at that time, on that platform, JRPGs were being very experimental in various ways. And Dragon Quest VIII stood apart by being a very traditional JRPG at the time. It had a comfortable and friendly-looking fantasy setting, turn-based combat, a small playable cast with defined roles in the story and in the party, and a very archetypical story about good versus evil. As the game starts, you name the silent protagonist. You are traveling with the king and princess of the kingdom you used to live at. But due to the actions of the antagonist of the story, that kingdom is now in ruins. The king has been turned into some kind of goblin creature, and the princess a horse. And you're traveling together to hopefully find a solution to all three of these problems. Before the game started, you already met a bandit that owes you a life debt. His name is Yangus. And if he were in a live-action movie, he would be Bob Hopkins. From here, you get to the first town in the game, and a scenario will play out that will be repeated throughout the game. You get to town in search of an answer to your problem with the king and the princess. You then discover some kind of problem in the town. In this case, finding the crystal ball for the fortune teller. You then resolve the situation, and you're given a small modicum of information to lead you to the next part of the game. The information, at least during the first half of the game, has to do with the antagonist, Dual Magus. And as you progress in the story, you will have two more characters join your silent protagonist and Yangus. A noble girl that's good with magic named Jessica, and a womanizing soldier from the church, Angelo. And in the original PlayStation 2 version, these are the only 4 characters you will have in the game. In the 3DS version of the game, there are 2 other characters that join your party. But I only have a way to capture PlayStation 2 footage, and not 3DS footage. The characters have roles to play in the story, and roles to play in your party. However, you do have some say in what role they play in your party. As each character levels, they receive skill points. Each character can put the points into different categories. Most of the categories are weapons, and one category is unique to each character. And depending where you invest your skill points will determine how that character performs in-game. For example, heavily investing in staffs for both Jessica and Angelo will grant them regenerating MP when using staffs. This will set them up to be almost pure casters, because they will have a number of bonuses for using spells, and absolutely no bonuses for doing basic physical attacks. So, before investing your skill points, it's important to think about how you intend to use your characters. as if you were so inclined, you could turn every character into a physical powerhouse, but in doing so, you would severely limit your options for things like healing. You don't get enough skill points to invest in everything, so you're best off choosing one weapon to specialize in per character, and also invest into the unique skill that each character gets. Courage for the hero, Humanities for Yangus, Sex Appeal for Jessica, and Charisma for Angelo. Each of those skills has a lot of utilities for the characters. Early on, you might think you need to invest in certain weapon skills for characters, based on what's available at shops. But not all that far into the game, you find out that is untrue, as early in the game, you're introduced to the Alchemy Pot. This allows you to make items and equipment for your characters by combining various items and pieces of equipment. Put the items into the alchemy pot, walk around for a little bit till you hear a ding. And using the alchemy pot, you will be able to make equipment far superior to what merchants generally have on offer at any given point in the game. And you will find alchemy recipes in all kinds of ways, sometimes by talking to NPCs. Other times by investigating bookshelves. And of course, if you're so inclined, there are vast charts available on the internet to tell you exactly how to make every item. At most points in the game, even if merchants don't have the kind of weapon you need for what you're specialized in, alchemy will provide you with a solution. So despite being a thoroughly traditional JRPG, there were some new ideas for both character progression and item acquisition. And while the story starts off as very typical, and unfolds in a thoroughly traditional way, there are various unique twists on the formula as you progress, which does prevent this game from feeling stale at any point. And it should also be noted that much of this game is voice acted, and the voice acting here is actually quite good and charming, both of which were kind of a rarity back in 2004.
Thanks to you, I managed to pull that little caper off without being caught. He was such an easy mark, I got a bit carried away. Still can't hang around. Don't want any more trouble.
What?
But why isn't Dragon Quest VIII available on modern platforms? Well, it is and it isn't. It is not available on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, or Switch. It is, however, available on iOS and Android. But how many people legitimately want to play a 60-plus hour RPG on their phone? I'm not really sure, personally. This game did receive a port to the 3DS. Not being a straight one-to-one port of the PlayStation 2 version, it actually enhanced Dragon Quest VIII in several ways, removing random encounters by making the enemies visible on the field, making the alchemy pot instant, adding 2 playable characters, and tweaking the Monster Arena minigame in a lot of ways. And the Monster Arena minigame really needs a video all its own. It's a very interesting part of this game. So ideally, if this game were to come to modern platforms, I would hope it to be derivative of the 3DS version, rather than the PlayStation 2 version. Or, if they were to offer both in one package, that would be even better, though I think we all know that is incredibly unlikely. And as there is no licensing issue or any other such nonsense, there is no reason this could not come to modern platforms. I personally think the only thing holding it back is that it's called Dragon Quest and not Final Fantasy. Of course, that could just be cynicism on my part. Please do subscribe, comment, like, and tell your friends.